Imagine the most powerful military force in Europe, backed by billion-dollar satellites, sophisticated intelligence networks, and elite special forces being utterly humiliated in the sprawling, unforgiving expanse of the African desert. For over a decade, France and its Western allies poured endless resources into the Sahel. They deployed supersonic Mirage fighter jets that ripped through the clouds, heavily armored Tiger attack helicopters that hovered over villages, and thousands of heavily armed troops under the grand, self-righteous banner of fighting global terrorism. Yet, year after grueling year, the bloodshed only multiplied. The terrorists did not retreat. They expanded. They conquered. They moved with absolute impunity across borders, slaughtering innocents and burning communities to the ground. And it was not a failure of technology. It was not a lack of firepower. It was a carefully engineered trap. It was a dark, brilliant, and deeply cynical geopolitical illusion designed to keep the African continent bleeding, permanently dependent, and chained to the political will of its former colonial masters. The West controlled the skies, but they deliberately kept the African soldiers completely blind on the ground. They used vital, real-time intelligence not as a tool to win a war, but as a weapon of geopolitical blackmail to keep African presidents compliant and subservient. The architects of this neo-colonial system thought this deadly game would last forever. They believed the Sahel would remain their permanent military playground, and a vast testing site for their weapons, and a perpetual justification for their presence over Africa's unimaginable mineral wealth. They believed this right up until the moment a 34-year-old captain named Ibrahim Traoré violently kicked down the door of history. He did not ask for permission from the global elites. He did not travel to European capitals to beg for foreign aid or logistical support. In a move of staggering, unprecedented defiance that sent immediate shockwaves through the heavily guarded halls of power in Washington, Paris, and London, Captain Traoré gave the French military establishment exactly 30 days to pack their bags, lower their flags, and get their troops out of Burkina Faso entirely. The Western generals and seasoned diplomats laughed at him. They went on international television and confidently predicted that his government would completely collapse into total anarchy in a matter of weeks without their protection. They waited patiently for the terrorists to march on Ouagadougou. They waited for Traoré to come crawling back, begging for their air support and their intelligence sharing. They were dead wrong. Traoré did not just survive the withdrawal of the empire. He masterminded one of the most brilliant, rapid, and devastating military pivots in modern geopolitical history. He completely bypassed the crippling Western arms monopoly that had choked African armies for decades, looked fiercely to the east, and acquired a terrifying new high-tech arsenal that would fundamentally alter the balance of power on the continent. He took the sky, which had always been the exclusive domain of foreign empires, and turned it into an unblinking, lethal weapon of African liberation. What you are about to hear is the untold, masterclass analysis of the Traoré Doctrine. This is the explosive reality of how a young, visionary African leader built an invisible shield of advanced combat drones, armed his own civilian population, and executed a flawless tactical checkmate against the greatest military empires on Earth. The era of the foreign savior is officially dead. The hunt has begun. To truly comprehend the sheer tactical genius of Ibrahim Traoré, you must first understand the deliberate, systematic crippling of the African military apparatus that preceded him. For generations, the former colonial powers maintained absolute, suffocating control over what types of weapons sovereign African nations were legally allowed to purchase. Through a complex, invisible web of defense pacts, intense diplomatic pressure, and strict end-user restrictions, countries like Burkina Faso were largely restricted to buying light arms, unarmored transport vehicles, and outdated surplus equipment from the West. If a Burkinabe leader had the audacity to request the purchase of advanced strike capabilities, heavy artillery, or modern attack aircraft, that request would be immediately tied up in endless bureaucratic red tape in Paris or Washington. It would be delayed for years or denied entirely under the hypocritical guise of protecting human rights or maintaining regional stability. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy of containment. A strong, heavily armed, technologically advanced African military is the ultimate nightmare for neo-colonial resource extraction. You cannot easily dictate economic terms, you cannot steal gold, and you cannot control the currency of a nation that possesses the capability to independently defend its own airspace and secure its own borders. When Traoré assumed power, he inherited an army that was undeniably brave but fundamentally, tragically outgunned. His soldiers were fighting ghosts in the deep desert. They were routinely ambushed by highly mobile insurgent groups riding in massive convoys of motorcycles and pickup trucks, armed with heavy machine guns, and funded by shadow networks that thrived in the chaos. The insurgents had the ultimate advantage of speed, intimate terrain knowledge, and the terrifying element of surprise. Yet the French military had the aerial assets, the drones, and the satellites to track and destroy these columns before they ever reached a village, but they routinely and callously withheld this critical intelligence from the Burkinabe High Command. Information was doled out only when it served a specific French strategic interest. Traoré realized immediately that you cannot outsource the survival of your people to a foreign power that actively profits from your instability. His first masterstroke was not executed on the battlefield, but in the ruthless realm of geopolitical procurement. Recognizing that true national sovereignty begins with the absolute diversification of military supply lines, Traoré executed a rapid pivot that left Western intelligence agencies completely reeling and scrambling for a response. And he bypassed the traditional condescending Western arms brokers and established direct, unconditional strategic partnerships with nations willing to supply high-end, transformative military technology without neo-colonial strings attached. He looked to Russia for heavy weaponry, tactical instruction, and geopolitical shielding at the United Nations. But most importantly, to solve the immediate tactical nightmare on the ground, he looked to Turkey. He moved swiftly to acquire the ultimate game-changer of modern asymmetric warfare, the Bayraktar TB2 and the massive, devastating Akinci unmanned aerial combat vehicles. The acquisition of this drone fleet was a tectonic shift in West African geopolitics. This was not just a purchase of hardware, it was the immediate, uncompromising acquisition of absolute aerial sovereignty. Well, to understand why this is so critical, you have to visualize the battlefield. The Sahel is a flat, expansive, deeply unforgiving terrain, roughly the size of Western Europe. It is geographically impossible to secure with ground troops alone. In the past, terrorist columns could assemble hundreds of fighters deep in the remote scrubland. They could travel dozens of kilometers completely undetected under the protective cover of pitch-black darkness, strike a military outpost or a sleeping village with overwhelming, brutal force, and vanish back into the wilderness long before a conventional rapid reaction force could even be mobilized. They owned the night. They operated with absolute, terrifying impunity. But the arrival of the Bayraktar TB2 and the Akinci fundamentally changed the mathematics of the war. Well, these are not mere surveillance toys. They are highly lethal, loitering munition platforms that have proven their devastating effectiveness on complex battlefields from the Caucasus to Eastern Europe. The Bayraktar. TB2 can loiter silently in the sky for up to 27 hours at altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet. From the perspective of the insurgents on the ground, it is virtually invisible and completely inaudible. It is equipped with state-of-the-art electro-optical and infrared cameras that easily pierce through the deepest darkness, the thickest cloud cover, and the most blinding desert dust storms. Traoré essentially flipped a switch and turned on a massive, unblinking, high-definition floodlight over his entire national territory. Imagine the profound and paralyzing psychological terror this new reality inflicts upon the enemy forces. For years, these insurgent commanders operated without fear, entirely confident that the night would hide them. Now, picture a terrorist commander organizing a raid in the dead of night, hundreds of miles from the capital city. He and his men believe they are safe. But 20,000 feet above them, in the freezing upper atmosphere, a silent, robotic machine is tracking their every movement, monitoring their exact heat signatures in crystal-clear definition. The drone operator is sitting securely in a high-tech, air-conditioned command center in Ouagadougou. The crosshairs on the screen smoothly lock onto the lead vehicle of the convoy. The laser targetator fires an invisible beam. An IMAML smart munition effortlessly detaches from the wing of the drone and glides silently through the night sky. In a fraction of a second, an insurgent convoy that threatened to massacre an entire community is reduced to a massive ball of fire, burning scrap metal and ash in the sand. There is no warning siren. There is no sound of an approaching jet engine. There is only instantaneous, overwhelming, and absolute destruction. With the deployment of the Akinci drone, which boasts a massive wingspan and the ability to carry a payload of over 1,500 kilograms, including bunker-busting munitions and long-range cruise missiles, Traoré turned the Burkina Faso Air Force into one of the most lethal, precise strike forces on the entire African continent. He democratized air power when he realized that his nation did not need to spend billions of dollars on a fleet of fragile, maintenance-heavy fighter jets that required foreign contractors to keep them operational. He built a lean, highly lethal, and incredibly efficient drone force that delivers maximum kinetic impact for a fraction of the cost. He shifted the Burkinabe military posture from a static, bleeding, defensive crouch into a relentless, high-tech hunting offense. The hunted had finally, decisively, become the hunters. However, Ibrahim Traoré is not just a technocrat obsessed with modern machinery. He is a brilliant, holistic military strategist who understands the deep complexities of human warfare. He knew that high technology alone does not win complex insurgencies. A drone can obliterate an enemy column from the sky, but a drone cannot hold a village, and a drone cannot secure a porous border crossing. A drone cannot look a terrified farmer in the eye, shake his hand, and guarantee that his family is finally safe to plant their crops. This profound realization brings us to the second, and arguably the most crucial, pillar of the Traoré Doctrine: the mass mobilization of the civilian population. Before Traoré took command, the military and the civilian population were often strictly divided. This was a toxic legacy of colonial administrative structures specifically designed to keep the armed forces separate from the people, turning the army into an instrument of elite suppression rather than national defense. Traoré systematically obliterated this divide, and he deeply understood the core principle of asymmetric warfare that dictates a successful insurgency must move among the people as a fish swims in the sea. To defeat the insurgency, you cannot simply bomb the sea, you must mobilize the sea against the fish. In a move of staggering historical significance, he initiated a massive, unprecedented expansion of the VDPs, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland. He bypassed the traditional, rigid military hierarchies and called directly upon the farmers, the local merchants, the youth in the cities, and the elders in the villages to step forward and take up arms to defend their own backyards. When this happened, the West, trapped in its profound arrogance and neo-colonial mindset, completely panicked. International human rights organizations based in Paris, London, and Washington issued frantic, alarmist reports, condemning the arming of civilians and loudly predicting it would lead to unimaginable chaos and civil war. What these distant observers completely failed to understand was that Traoré was not just recklessly handing out rifles, he was systematically forging a national immune system. He was creating an unbreakable bond of blood and duty between the state and the soil. The response from the Burkinabe citizens was absolutely overwhelming. Tens of thousands of ordinary men and women volunteered. They were rapidly given tactical training, equipment, and a clear, unwavering mandate to protect their communities at all costs. This mobilization created a flawless, symbiotic tactical loop between the ground and the sky, establishing an intelligence network that no foreign satellite could ever match. The VDPs became the ultimate, omnipresent ground sensors. They know the terrain intimately because they have lived on it for generations. They know every hidden path, every dry riverbed, every specific watering hole, and every cave. They know the precision strike is executed without hesitation. And before the smoke and dust even begin to settle, the regular army mechanized units, working seamlessly alongside the local VDPs, sweep rapidly into the area to secure the perimeter, collect the captured weapons, and decisively eliminate any remaining threats. It is a pincer movement of breathtaking efficiency. It is the overwhelming high-tech hammer of the drone perfectly striking the unyielding grassroots anvil of the people. By completely integrating the local population into the national defense architecture, Traoré made the military indistinguishable from the nation itself. You can defeat an isolated army garrison, and you can ambush a military convoy, but you cannot defeat an armed, deeply motivated, and highly unified population of millions of people who are directly backed by laser-guided munitions raining from the sky. The insurgent forces, who once used the vastness of the Sahel to hide and launch surprise attacks, suddenly found themselves surrounded by entirely hostile terrain. Every single shepherd tending his flock could be a military scout. Every farmer working his field could be an armed soldier ready to defend his land. The psychological momentum of the entire conflict shifted completely and irreversibly. There is simply nowhere left for the terrorists to hide. Now, let us pan out from the immediate tactical battlefield and observe the massive global geopolitical checkmate this strategy has achieved. The undeniable, accelerating success of the Traoré Doctrine is currently causing absolute quiet panic in the highest corridors of power in Western capitals. It is, without question, the single greatest existential threat to neo-colonial hegemony in Africa today. Why? Because it systematically destroys the foundational, racist myth of the empire. For decades, the overarching global narrative dictated that African nations are inherently fragile, deeply corrupt, and institutionally incapable of managing complex, modern security apparatuses. The myth insisted that they absolutely required the permanent, guiding presence of French, American, or European troops to prevent their societies from collapsing back into the Stone Age. The Western military presence in the Sahel was the ultimate, modern-day Trojan horse, a highly sophisticated excuse used to maintain military bases, exert total control over sovereign airspace, dictate foreign and domestic policy, and secure highly favorable, exploitative terms for the extraction of vital resources like gold, uranium, and lithium. When Captain Traoré politely but firmly ordered the French military to pack their bags and abandon their bases, the political elites in the Élysée Palace fully expected him to fail spectacularly. They expected Ouagadougou to fall to the insurgents within months. They eagerly waited for the moment Traoré would have to publicly admit defeat and beg for the return of their Mirage jets and their intelligence-sharing agreements. Instead, Traoré built his own highly advanced air force from scratch. He established his own secure, impenetrable intelligence networks. He motivated and armed his own troops. He paid for his own modern weapons using the wealth of the national treasury and deliberately bypassing the crippling, predatory debt traps of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And the results of this sovereign defiance are undeniable and visible for the entire world to see. Territories that had been completely abandoned to terrorist control for years, zones that Western analysts confidently claimed were lost to the state forever, are being systematically, brutally recaptured. Hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons who had fled the violence are now slowly packing their belongings and returning to rebuild their ancestral lands. The Burkinabe flag is being proudly and firmly planted in the red dust of regions that haven't seen the presence of the state in over a decade. Well, this absolute shattering of the neo-colonial narrative is exactly why the international mainstream media attacks Ibrahim Traoré so viciously and relentlessly. This is why they consistently label his sovereign government a regime, why they call his structural reforms democratic backsliding, and why they desperately try to paint his defending soldiers as human rights violators. They are not objectively analyzing his military performance. They are reacting out of sheer, unadulterated geopolitical terror. They know the undeniable mathematics of the situation unfolding before them. If Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation historically classified by Western institutions as one of the poorest countries in the world, can achieve total military sovereignty, secure its vast borders, and decisively defeat a complex, internationally funded insurgency without taking a single order from Paris or Washington, then the entire neo-colonial house of cards collapses permanently. If Burkina Faso can achieve this, Mali can achieve it. If Mali can achieve it, Niger can achieve it. And that is exactly what is happening in real time. By fiercely forging the alliance of Sahel states with his brothers Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Chiani, Traoré is actively exporting this revolutionary doctrine. These nations are no longer fighting isolated battles. They are pooling their advanced drone fleets. They are sharing highly sensitive, real-time intelligence without Western interference. They have signed mutual defense pacts, effectively creating an impenetrable, unified African military shield across the entire Sahelian belt, while they have created a localized NATO that answers only to the soil of Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is actively writing the definitive blueprint for the complete, irreversible decolonization of the African military and geopolitical space. He is conclusively proving to the world that national security is not a luxury commodity to be purchased at an exorbitant price from former colonial masters. It is a fundamental, non-negotiable right to be built independently from within. He is demonstrating with every drone strike and every reclaimed village that true, lasting power does not come from the condescending approval of the so-called international community, but from the absolute, unwavering alignment of a visionary leader, his advanced military technology, and the indomitable will of his people. And the Traoré Doctrine is not just about winning tactical battles in the unforgiving desert. It is about reclaiming the psychological and spiritual dignity of the entire African continent. For far too long, the only narrative permitted was one of endless defeat, of pitiful reliance, of inherent inferiority. By putting the most advanced, lethal technology directly into the hands of his own troops, and by standing fearlessly shoulder to shoulder with them on the front lines, Traoré has reignited the ancient, unconquerable warrior spirit of the ancestors. The Burkinabe soldier is no longer a disposable, under-equipped pawn in a foreign chess game played in European capitals. He is the master of his own destiny. He is the guardian of his own sky. When the history of the 21st century is finally written, the defining, monumental story of Africa will not be about the overwhelming, suffocating power of Western empires and their endless interventions. It will be about the young, 34-year-old captain who looked at the impossible odds stacked against his nation, completely refused to surrender, looked up to the sky, and decided to take it back by force. The combat drones are flying silently overhead. The volunteers for the defense of the homeland are marching proudly through the reclaimed villages. The French military bases stand empty and abandoned in the dust. The geopolitical checkmate is complete, and the board has been flipped forever.